Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you everyone for joining our symposium today, jointly led by APS UK and APS students. In this, we hope to give you a comprehensive guide to the admissions process for medical and dental school in the UK in preparation for the 2023 admissions. So today we have a range of speakers from various medical and dental schools, as well as some qualified doctors and admissions tutors with a wealth of experience in the field of admissions, interview process, and personal statements. We'll do proper introductions later on when we get to their sections. And throughout this talk today, there will be an opportunity for Q&A. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see an option for Q&A, which will then be answered towards the end of the session. So to go over what we have coming up today, an overview of the admissions process, a look at work experience, the do's and don'ts of work experience, how to choose your university, the admissions tests, the personal statement, the interview, and various other topics and questions. Before we get on to that, I'd like to pass over to Dr. Abdul Hafiz to give an introduction onto APS UK.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome everyone. I know people have joined us from up and down the country, as well as few people from abroad as well. Welcome to all of you to APS UK, which is Association of Pakistani Physicians and Surgeons of the United Kingdom. APS UK has been working in different aspects of the medical fields within UK, as well as now some other countries for last nearly 16 years. This particular project of helping our future generations, our future doctors, we started nearly 4 years ago. And I remember the day when we started this session with only 12 students. So we actually trained them in terms of how to go through the interview, which is the biggest hurdle. We're going to go in more detail at that stage. We have been helping students with work placements, guiding in other areas as well. But that first batch, which we trained all 12 of them, all 12 got admissions into medical school. That was very inspiring for our team. And then over next 4 years, obviously, we developed this program, we made it more robust, we extended it. When the first lockdown happened in 2020, we came up with this idea of a virtual work experience, which was unique of its kind. And Dr. Shabina Aziz is sitting here. She was the project director. We had nearly 500 students who signed up for that project, again, from all different kind of communities. Very successful project, excellent feedback, a lot of hard work and from Dr. Shabina Aziz, which we really appreciate. This project was highlighted by Health Education England in their annual report 2021. And this was one of their case studies. So it was such an amazing project. I welcome you all again, and I hand back to Zain. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction to APS UK, Dr. Hafiz. To give a brief introduction as well to the students wing of APS UK is APS Students, currently led by myself, and I am a final year medical student at Barts in the London School of Medicine and Dentistry, as well as led by Aisha Zahid, who's also here as one of the panelists, who I'll pass over to her in a second. To give an introduction to APS Students, and the work we do, we aim to provide a platform for Pakistani medical students and professionals throughout their time through medical and dental school, as well as the admissions process into it and applying for a job afterwards and supporting them throughout that whole time. This includes teaching, research opportunities, and general community networking. It's a great initiative, and all the time we're recruiting, we're looking for new volunteers, and we're looking for new helpers all the time. And if it is something you'd like to get involved with, please do reach out to myself or Aisha. I'll just pass over to Aisha now, who'll give another brief overview of APS Students before we get started.
Thank you, Zain. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So as Zain has mentioned, we're the APS Students branch. So we are involved in organising a lot of different things for when you guys begin medical school, inshallah. So we will be organising work experience opportunities, help sessions such as this one here, on how to get into medical school, but also throughout the medical school journey, things like electives, research opportunities, lectures and talks by professionals to guide you through medical school, and also to provide a network of Pakistani medical students for you guys to socialize and liaise with. So that's what we're working towards, inshallah. So you will have the opportunity to sign up as well to our newsletters and get involved towards the end of this talk. But yeah, that's what we do as the student branch.
Thank you for that introduction, Aisha. To get started, we're going to move straight on to an introduction, an overview of the admissions process. Each speaker is going to introduce themselves, so you get to know a bit about their background and their experience. We're going to start with a talk from Hassan Adil, who's a first-year medical student at Manchester University. Having recently gone through the admissions process, it's all fresh in his mind, and I'm sure he'll be able to give a nice, succinct overview of the admissions process into medical school. Hassan?
Okay, so as Zain just said, I'm Hassan Adil, a first-year medical student at University of Manchester. I'm just going to share my screen. Can you see that, everyone? Yeah, okay. So just a bit of statistics with around COVID. So pre-COVID in 2019, there were about 7,500 places across all universities in UK for about 22,000 applicants. But just 2 years later, there's 2,000 more seats, 9,500 for nearly 29,000 applicants. So medicine is just becoming more and more competitive each year, especially since the onset of COVID. So when applying to medical school, there's a few things that you need to keep in mind. So you have your GCSE grades or equivalent. Some universities have different requirements for GCSEs, or will use point scoring systems, including your GCSEs. So you should keep that in mind. Your A levels, the grades that you are the subjects you take, and your predicted results. Most medical schools will have a requirement of 3 A's and will require chemistry and biology. Some don't require biology. And the third subject most universities leave to you, so long as you achieve a grade A or higher. Work experience and volunteering is very useful when applying to medical school, both in your personal statement and to talk about your experience in carrying roles during interviews. Almost all universities in UK will require an entrance exam. So this will either be the UCAT or the UK CAT, it used to be called quite a while ago, or the BMAT. These are separate exams, so the UCAT will be used to apply to most universities, while BMAT is starting to catch on to some of them, including Oxbridge and Imperial College London. Your personal statement and UCAS need to be sorted for about mid-October is the deadline for medical applicants. And through UCAS, you get 5 options to apply to, and only 4 of those can be applications to medicine. The 5th option you can leave blank, or you can apply to a different field which might be related, such as biomed. So that's the UCAS, and after you've sent off your application and done your entrance exams with your predicted grades, then you'll move on to the interview stage, where the universities will reach out to you and offer times for you to take your interview. And then you'll have your interview, which will either be in an MMI style. So that's a multiple mini interview. So there'll be different stations that you'll go through for 5 to 7 minutes normally. And you'll be you'll be scored on each station, and they'll either have a cutoff point or they'll take the top scores, or you'll have a panel interview, which is one long interview, which will last 25 to 30 minutes normally, in which a panel of 3 people, normally doctors or another medical student at the university, will ask you questions. And just before I finish off, there's one useful resource I found for looking into resources, and that is the Medical Schools Council. So this website, if you click on it, if you type it up and go through it, you'll find a document that will outline the requirements for all the medical schools in UK. So it will show their required entrance exams, how many people applied, how many people they accepted, how many got to interview, their average A levels, what subjects they take, etc. And just reiterating, you can only apply to 4 medical universities here. So that is it for the overview. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan, for that overview of the admissions process. We're now going to go straight on to an overview of work experience, the do's and don'ts of work experience, maximizing your learning, how to get work experience, a complete overview of that. This is going to be delivered by Dr. Shabina Aziz, who is not only a GP in Leeds, but also a project director for the APS UK Virtual Work Experience Programme for A-level students. I'll pass it on to Dr. Aziz, who can give a more in-depth introduction as well as an overview of the work experience process.
Thank you. So my name is Dr. Aziz. I actually went to Liverpool Medical School, and I'm now a GP based in Leeds. I have a bit more of a portfolio career than a standard GP career. I've also been quite heavily involved in marking personal statements and the interview process at Leeds University since qualifying as a doctor myself. So I've read a lot of personal statements and I've met a lot of students who've come for the interview. So you learn a lot from seeing other people go through the process, and hopefully I've been able to help a lot of people through our virtual work experience over the last couple of years as well. But now what I'm going to talk to you about is, let's see, what's up? So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about work experience, not so much like the do's and don'ts, but the importance of it. And medical schools require applicants to have an understanding of what a career in medicine involves, and that's the reason really why you need work experience. So it's essential that all applicants gain a people-focused experience of providing care or service, and that can come in 2 different forms. So it's not always necessary for you to have a work experience placement in a GP surgery or in a hospital. If it's working with other people in a caring or a service role, that's just as valuable. I think obviously a lot of people feel disadvantaged if they don't have a direct observation of healthcare, but I wouldn't feel that way. It's more important that you remember that work experience can take many different forms. And actually it's really important how you use your work experience in your admissions process, not the actual, I've done 1 week of sitting in a GP clinic. It's what you've learned from that. And also, you know, having things like volunteering in a care home, having a weekend job, working with people, that's the main focus. And all this information is on the Medical Schools Council website that Hassan shared with you earlier. To try to get work experience in a more kind of healthcare setting, you could think about handing in your CV or emailing places in your area, so maybe even your local GP, your local pharmacist, local hospices, care homes in your area. A lot of hospitals do have a process for work experience, so like an application process as well. So not everybody is successful at getting hospital placement, but it shouldn't stop you from trying. There's other activities like reading medical journals, following the news, keeping up to date, interviewing, talking to other doctors or other healthcare professionals. Like I said, you know, we as doctors, we work in a wider team, and everybody has their part to play in the team. And it's important for you as people applying for medicine, you're aware of how everybody's role is just as important, and that their contribution counts as well, and how to communicate with different healthcare members as well. But the ability to reflect on what you've learnt about yourself and about medicine, that's really the key of what medical schools are looking for when they assess your application. So it's really about how you reflect on any experience and how you can apply that to your medical admissions process. There's online resources as well. There's the Brighton and Sussex Medical School. They have an online e-learning module, and the RCGP have Observe GP as well. And they've both been recognised by universities. And we also have, there's not just our virtual work experience run by APS UK, but there's other organisations which have some kind of webinars that you can attend, and they are all experiences that you can use in your personal statement or at the interview stage. So, like I said, all forms of voluntary work can provide helpful work experience. There's a couple of websites here that you can jot down to see, to find opportunities in your area. Sometimes schools, your school can help you as well. So maybe speaking to your year director or your careers advisor to see if there's any opportunities in your area as well. For example, sometimes I remember there are a few opportunities about helping children read in local primary schools in deprived areas. So that might be something that's a possibility going forward. So I'm going to focus the next couple of slides on why reflection is important, because like I said, you could have a really good sounding placement, but if you've not jotted it down properly at the time or reflected about it properly, it's going to be meaningless. So reflection is really important because it demonstrates insights by identifying actions to help you learn, developing greater insight into yourself and self-awareness, and helping you identify opportunities where you can actually improve. And that's why reflection is really important in the NHS as well, because the patient safety is key. And we talk about how reflection can help improve patient safety. So there's all those, if you have a look on this diagram, how like individuals can learn from experiences that happened and how lessons can be learned and changes can be made to make safer doctors, safer team members, which leads to better patient care. So how to reflect, because reflecting is quite a difficult skill. It's not something that you really taught at this stage in your education, I guess, at school. But there isn't any hard or fast rules. It's very personal. And like I said, experiences can be anything from, you know, a conversation that you've had with a GP, a conversation you've had with a receptionist who works at a GP practice, or the secretary is there as well. But write your diary entries immediately after the activity or your day at a work experience placement, and, you know, write a full, so kind of jot down a brief summary of what happened and then come back to it a few days later to kind of really write it up and explain your feelings in relation to your strengths and capacities, your fears, your weaknesses, what you've learned from that experience and what you might do differently in a different experience if you've been involved in a situation where you actually got to have some patient contact. Was there something different you could have done in the future? Or did you not take the opportunity to ask lots of questions when you had the chance to? So things that you can think of you could improve on next time. And there's a few different ways that you can, a few different frameworks that you can use to help structure your reflection, which is important when it comes to interview technique and your personal statement as well. So really about what's describing what happened, exploring it. So what was the most interesting, most relevant thing about it? How did you think? How did you react at the time? And what you've learned from that. Another good model to use is the what, so, what, now, what model, and you can search that up in Google. That's really comes up with really easy questions for you to jot them down into headings, and that will help structure your reflective entry. So this is just an example of someone's reflection on a GP, like the Observer GP, which is a virtual work experience program that I mentioned earlier on the RCGP website. And you can see how they've structured it. It's not, it's an example of how you can use this, for example, in your interview. You could maybe use something similar, a structure in your personal statement, and that will help you develop evidence for the skills and attributes that you need to show medical schools that you're a worthy candidate. And this information is again on the Medical Schools Council website. And the reason why I put that in here is because any experience is evidence that you are a worthy candidate to enter into medicine, and you need evidence of all of these attributes. It looks like a long list. What I would suggest is what I've mentioned before, is using a tool called the Wheel of Life, and using that as selecting a few different headings and scoring yourself of how much evidence have I got that I'm a good team player, or how much evidence have I got that I'm a good leader, or I've got good communication skills, and rate yourself accordingly. And then you've highlighted areas then that you need to work on or that you need to provide evidence for. And using any experience going forward will help you with that. So my kind of key takeaway points is any experience is worthy of putting into your personal statement. It's about how you reflect on that. So make the most out of any placement that you do have by engaging with different team members, asking lots of questions, not limiting yourself to thinking it needs to be in a healthcare setting. Think a little bit more outside of the box. Get yourself out in the community and volunteer, and use your reflective writing skills to help you in your personal statement and your interview. And I'll hand back to Zain. Thank you.
Thank you for that brilliant overview on work experience, Dr. Aziz. That was very helpful and very insightful, especially the usefulness of reflection. Just a reminder to look out for some of the programs that APS UK does put out regarding work experience, virtual clinical placement, which would be upcoming soon, inshallah, as well as the help for interviews, which we'll be covering shortly as well. Just a reminder that for all questions, I direct you to the Q&A function at the bottom, and then hopefully we'll get to them after each panelist has spoken, inshallah. On to the next section is where we're talking about how to choose a university, as well as one of the entrance exams, which is the UCAT. To talk about these sections, I'll pass it back over to Hassan Adil.
All right, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen there. So I'll start off by talking about the UCAT exam, the University Clinical Aptitude Test. So as I mentioned earlier, this used to be called the UKCAT, but it was changed to UCAT. There's no actual change to the content, but for people who may have applied to med school a while ago, there has been just a slight change in name. So this for 2020 intake was applicable to 30 universities in UK, which was most of them. I believe there's 38 or 39 universities currently. So for majority of the universities, they'll require the UCAT. So this year, the booking will open on 20th June. Please keep in mind that all these dates are subject to change, and check the official UCAT website. The link is at the bottom of the slide. The exams will take place between the 11th of July and 29th of September, and the costs can vary depending on when you're booking for your test and if you are applying for UCAT SEN, which is some additional time for special needs. The venue for the UCAT can be taken at a Pearson Test Center. Same place where, for those of you who have, where you can sit your driving theory exam. You only get one attempt for the UCAT per year, and it's an online exam which lasts over 2 hours. And once you finish your exam, you'll be given your results. So the actual UCAT exam is composed of 5 sections. The first section will be verbal reasoning. And each section, apart from situational judgment, is scored between 300 to 900 points, with 600 being the average. So, or the midpoint even. So verbal reasoning, you'll have 44 questions over 21 minutes. You have decision making, which is 29 questions over 31 minutes. You have quantitative reasoning, or the math section, which is 36 questions in 24 minutes. Abstract reasoning for 55 questions in 13 minutes. And situational judgment, which is 69 questions over 26 minutes. The mean score for the UCAT in 2020 was 2,500 points. And 11 points. So that was a bit over 625 points in each section. And the average situational judgment score is band 2. Most universities will at least require a band 3 and generally look for band 1 and 2. So I'm just going to briefly talk about each section. So I'll start off with the first one, verbal reasoning. So in this, you have 11 passages to read, and there's 4 questions per passage for the 44 questions. And you have 21 minutes to go through them. So you should, time management is a big part of UCAT, since you have to answer a large amount of multiple choice questions in a short period of time. So for verbal reasoning, try and aim for about 30 seconds per question. And the answers for this will generally be a true, false, and can't tell. The Decision making will have 29 questions in 31 minutes. And you'll have about 1 minute per question, which leaves 2 minutes of extra time at the end to go through. And there's 6 types of questions, which are split into 2 sets. So you have data crunching, in which you'll need to make deductions and use logic to solve them. So these could be syllogisms, which is where you determine the correct statement given a set of information. Logic puzzles, so you'll be given a few statements like if A is B and C is also B, then what is D, for example. You have maths-based questions where you'll have to test probabilities and statistics. And the other set of questions will be unpacking data. So these will typically be like visual, numerical, or textual. So you can have Venn diagram questions in which you'll have to interpret a Venn diagram. Strongest argument question where you'll have to give the best reason for an answer out of the 5 possible statements. And inference questions where, given a set of information, you must find the correct statement out of your options. The quantitative reasoning, well, you have 39 questions over 24 minutes, and it's split into 9 sets of 4 questions. So for this, you should aim to spend about 30 seconds per question. There'll be 6 to 7 sets of simple calculation questions and 2 to 3 sets of complex questions. So I'd recommend for the complex questions to guess and flag them for review at the end and go for the simple questions, because once again, time management is key, and it's better to spend time on getting marks which you know you can get versus spending a lot of time on complex calculations, which would be fairly difficult to do, will take can take a bit too much time and could deduct from your score. In the UCAT, you will be given a virtual calculator, and you can use the number pad on your keyboard to type into it. And if there is an issue with the calculator, then do let the examiner know. You have the abstract reasoning section. So here you have 55 questions in 13 minutes. So this is split into 11 sets of 5 questions. So for this section, it's the fastest paced section, if you'll notice. For just 13 minutes, you have nearly 60 questions to answer. So instead of aiming to answer 1 question in a set amount of time, aim to answer 1 set every minute. And start your answering by looking first at the test sets that, or the sets that you've been given as information to find the general pattern, and then consider the test shapes, consider your answers and which one of those will fit the pattern. The final section is the SJT, situational judgment. So here you'll have 69 questions over 26 minutes, in which you'll go through about 20 scenarios, which will have 2 to 5 questions. And for this, you should spend about 30 seconds reading each scenario and 10 seconds answering each question. In the situational judgment, you'll have 3 different types of questions. So there'll be importance, so how important it is to perform each task, whether it's very important or not important at all. Appropriateness, how appropriate is the action taken for the scenario? So is it very appropriate? Is it inappropriate? Is it appropriate but not the best? And the final question type are actions. So what is the best action to take in the scenario? And those questions will take the longest, but there are relatively fewer of them. So just a brief summary. For verbal reasoning, you should spend about 30 seconds per question, and you won't have much time at the end to go through. For decision making, you should spend 1 minute per question, and you'll have if you follow that, you'll have 2 minutes of extra time at the end to review your answers. For quantitative reasoning, spend about 30 seconds per question, and you'll have 4 to 5 minutes of extra time to go through and look in more detail at the more complex questions. For abstract reasoning, spend about 1 minute per set of questions, and that will leave you with a bit of extra time, 1 to 2 minutes, to go through any questions that you found difficult. And for situational judgment, spend about 1 minute per question set. And given its variability in number of sets, you could have just a bit of luxury time to no extra time at all at the end. Now, when it comes to choosing your universities, if you have a high UCAT score, then most universities will accept scores above the 70th percentile. You can find the scores on the UCAT website. But if you have a low UCAT score, then these are some options to consider. So you can look at universities that have more weighting on other sections. So for example, the Queen's University Belfast will uses a points-based system from your GCSEs and your UCAT combined. So if you scored well on your GCSEs, then that can help maybe push you through into the band that will be invited to interview. The University of Lincoln also follows a similar system where they include the GCSEs and UCATs together in a point-based system. Another thing to look at is for new universities, which could be a lot less competitive. So for example, University of Sunderland, and these new universities, since they're looking for more applicants, will accept a lower UCAT scores. So generally above the second decile, above 20% of the candidates. So in 2020, that was a total score of 2290. So about 575 per section. So just below the midpoint for each section. And they'll at least look for band 3 in situational judgment. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I don't think any university will consider a band 4 in situational judgment, but you can check the Medical School Council's link and the university website themselves for more information. You can also potentially consider the BMAT exam, as those universities, though they'll be sent the UCAT results, will not consider that an application. So potentially Oxford or Cambridge. I know that Keele, University of Keele takes BMAT. Imperial College London, University College London, those take BMAT as well. So if your UCAT score is low and you are just having an off day, the BMAT can be a good backup exam to get to access the interviews. That's all I have for the UCAT. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan, for that nice overview of the UCAT entrance exam. While you're talking, I noticed some questions did come in regarding the BMAT. The BMAT will now be spoken about. Before we get on to that, I'd just like to remind you all that the Q&A panel at the bottom is there, open for questions. As for any questions regarding the emails of the speakers, for any queries, please do reach out to myself, and I can put you in touch if necessary with the speakers, or in touch with for any further inquiries, and we can get you the answers, inshallah. So I'll put my details now in the chat function, so hopefully you can see that. Please do feel free to reach out for any further questions after today. But for now, for more information on the second entrance exam, which is the BMAT, I'll pass it over to Aisha, who, as I previously mentioned, is the Vice President of APS Students, as well as being a fourth-year medical student at University of Manchester, currently intercalating at Imperial.
Thank you, Zain. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the BMAT, the second admissions test for medical and dental school within the UK. So this is a 2-hour aptitude test, and it has 3 different sections. So you have section 1, which tests your problem solving skills, the ability to understand arguments, data analysis, and inference. The first section is 60 minutes long. You'll have 32 multiple choice questions. Section 2 then examines your ability to apply scientific knowledge that you will have covered in high school, so both in science and maths lessons, and you have 30 minutes for this section, and you'll answer 27 multiple choice questions. And then section 3 is basically an essay writing section, and it tests your skills and your ability to select, develop, and organize ideas, and to communicate them concisely in writing. So you'll get a choice of 3 questions, and you get to choose one within the exam, and you write an essay on that, and you have 30 minutes for the third section. So it's different to the UCAT because there are 3 broad sections, and it's more of a knowledge-based test. And it is quite a tough exam. Unlike the UCAT, you won't be allowed to use a calculator for the math sections, and you also will not be given a dictionary for the essay. So the way that it's scored is also quite different to the UCAT. So as Adil Hassan has mentioned before, you'll get an average score for your UCAT. With the BMAT, you will get a score for each of the 3 different sections. So section 1 and 2 are scored out of 9. And section 3 you'll be given a score out of 5 and also a letter as well. So yeah, it is quite different. With the marking, there is no negative marking. So if you get a question wrong, you won't be marked negatively. No marks will be knocked off for you. There's also not a specific pass or fail score for this exam. However, each university uses it differently, and I'll come on to that in a second. Section 1 and 2, which is the multiple choice question sections, in this, each question is actually worth 1 mark. And then your raw marks are converted to give you a score on a scale from 1 to 9, as I mentioned before. So BMAT has their own scoring range, and they will convert your raw mark into a score on this scale. Scale goes from 1 to 9. 1 is low, 9 is being the highest that you can get. So who should actually take the BMAT exam? It's not necessary for absolutely everyone who's applying to medical school. You can apply to universities who only accept the UCAT, and therefore you might have to just take that one exam. However, the BMAT is not used by every single university. There are only specific ones that use this, which I'll talk about in a second. But that means that you only need to consider taking the exam if you're applying to one of those universities. You can take both of the exams, and most people who will do the BMAT will also have taken the UCAT, and that just broadens your chance of getting into medical school. Some people just like to focus on the UCAT. That's absolutely fine as well. One thing to note with the BMAT is that your exam results are actually released after the UCAS deadline, so after you've already chosen your universities and applied. So you're kind of essentially applying blindly, which can be quite risky. However, you should have started, if you're thinking of taking this exam, you should have started doing the mock papers quite early on. And so therefore, when it comes to the time of submitting your UCAS application, you should have a bit of an idea of how well you're going to be scoring. And then you can choose your universities based on that. And as I mentioned before, you can increase your chance of actually getting in place at any of the medical schools by applying to a mix of both UKCAT and BMAT universities. So that means that if your BMAT score isn't as high as you wanted it to be, at least you've still got a chance with the UCAT universities. Like the UCAT, the test can only be taken once per admission cycle. So once you've taken it, the score that you get for that year is the one that you're going to be using to apply with. So these are the universities that actually accept the BMAT. And so these would rather you have the BMAT than the UCAT. They don't accept the UCAT for admission. So there's Brighton and Sussex Medical School. Each university also uses your score differently. So Brighton and Sussex uses it to select candidates for interview. Imperial uses the BMAT, and that is used in conjunction with the rest of your UCAS application. They have a cutoff score for interview, which if you get above that, you'll be invited to interview. If you get below that, you won't be considered for an interview. Lancaster University also have a cutoff score. University College London uses your BMAT score alongside the rest of your application. They don't have a cutoff score, but if you have a higher score, you'll be favoured. University of Cambridge, they don't have a pass mark as well. They don't have a cutoff score, but those with a higher score are more likely to be invited for an interview. University of Leeds, again, the same as Cambridge. Your students are ranked by both their achieved grades, so their achieved A-level and GCSE grades and predicted grades, and also the BMAT score. And then the top 1,000 are invited to interview. If you're successful, then in your interview, the essay that you wrote in section 3 of your BMAT will actually be used as one of the stations during your interview. There's no cutoff score again, but if you have a high BMAT score and quite a low GCSE or predicted grade score, a high BMAT score can compensate for low academic scores, and also vice versa. So if you have a high academic score and a low BMAT score, it can be compensated for. And then lastly, University of Oxford, they use your BMAT score and your GCSE grades for shortlisting candidates for interview. And again, weaker GCSE grades can be compensated for by a strong BMAT score. But again, a higher score is better. So those were the universities that actually use the BMAT. In terms of registering for the exam, it's usually open within in September and November of the year of your admission cycle. This could change due to COVID. So for example, last year, there was only one time slot. They only held the exam in November, and the exam was also held online, whereas usually before that it's been in person. It's either completed at test center, schools can be turned into test centers, or online at home. And you can find your closest test center by going onto the official BMAT website and booking it through there. There is a cost associated with it, so it's £61. However, if you are not able to fund this, you can be reimbursed if you're eligible via the BMAT site themselves, and they have criteria on that site that you can have a look at to see if you qualify for that. And here I've just got a picture on the side as well of an example of last year's kind of registration process. So registration opened in September, you have a deadline to apply, and then you have deadline for registration, and then also your test date and your results being released quite a while after you've actually taken the exam. So in terms of how to prepare for the exam, I would suggest using the resources that are on the official BMAT website. So they have practice papers and mock papers on that website. Usually this is sufficient. However, some students do like to go on other courses and use other resources. There's things such as the Kaplan course or the Medic portal. They have courses and question banks as well that you can use to prepare. However, those are associated with a cost and they're optional as well. You can find the specification on the BMAT website, and this lists exactly what will be covered in the exam. So it's almost like your exam paper specifications. Ensure that you're familiar with all of the contents on there, because that is what's going to be examined. And there's also a marking criteria available on their website for section 3 in the essay, which will show you how to get the top marks in there. So I'd really suggest having a look at those if you're planning to sit this test. And then just a bit of a run through of the day. So obviously, if you want to take the test, ensure that you arrive before your scheduled time, account for any leeway with like traffic and things like that. You need to take some valid photo ID, so either passport or driving license, and equipment. If it's going to be computer based, which they will let you know later on during this year, I'm assuming, you might need to take your laptop if computers are not provided at the site. If it's paper based, then you can use a pencil. You need black ink pen and an eraser. Again, you're not allowed to take dictionaries or calculators, and you can take a clear water bottle without labels. During the test, you have the 3 sections that I mentioned, and they're completed one after the other. You have a certain allotted time for each section. You can't use extra time from one section in the next section. It's one after the other. So unfortunately, you have to stick to those time limits. And at the end of the exam, you will then receive your login details so that you can access your results online on results day, which will be about 3 or 4 weeks after you've taken the exam. So yeah, that's everything about the BMAT. If you do have any questions, please do use the Q&A function and we'll address them at the end.
Thank you, Aisha, for that brilliant run through of the BMAT exam. So now we've had a run through of the entrance exams as well as work experience. We're now going to move on to the other part of the application, which is the personal statement and the interview. And to give a brief overview of that, we're going to pass back over to Hassan, inshallah.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. So here, so for the personal statement, you have a set character and line limit on the UCAS website. So normally you'll hit the character limit first, which is at 4,000 characters, or you have a maximum of 47 lines on the official UCAS website. There are, if you don't have access to your UCAS login yet, which you probably don't, there are websites available online for you to check your character and line usage if you've already started working on your personal statement. From the information and from what I did during my application, I found it best to make a start on the personal statement around April of year 12 and create an initial draft and have that reviewed. I personally went through about 10 or 11 drafts for my personal statement. Most people go through about 5 or 6. So just every time you create a draft, make sure that it's reviewed by multiple people to check for any grammar or any potential different ways to word things so that you have additional characters to talk about other achievements that you mentioned. And your final draft for the personal statement should be ready for submission around mid-October on UCAS, so about a month after the start of year 13. It's important, some important points to mention are linking examples from any work experience or volunteering or even hobbies to medicine, as that way you're able to you're able to show to the university why you've selected medicine. That's the point of your personal statement. You want to tell the university that you want to do medicine. All of your life experiences and hobbies and so on have led to you making this decision, and you need to show how they link to medicine. Through the personal statement, you should articulate and mention any achievements you've had, as and those can help like bolster and make it look potentially better than other people. And some key points to mention are that you need to show that you are a team player. You're able to work well in a team as a leader or a follower. As a leader, that you're able to delegate tasks between individuals while working in a team or individually. Show that you're versatile, adaptable, and compatible with others, and that you're motivated and determined to the career of medicine. The path of medicine is one of lifelong learning, and that's another point that you should go through. You also need to show that you have a caring nature. You could potentially giving examples through work experience or volunteering if you have any, and why you chose medicine, as there are many other professions where you're able to care for others, for example, nursing or dentistry. So you need to decide why you've chosen this career, medicine or dentistry or nursing, and you need why not the others. However, that's more pertinent to interviews. You shouldn't make your personal statement specific to a single university, as the same personal statement will be sent off to all the universities you apply to. So you shouldn't just completely talk about, say, University of Liverpool in your personal statement, while also sending off your personal statement to like Newcastle, Nottingham, Birmingham, etc. It needs to be a generic statement about yourself. You need to talk about your extracurricular and supracurricular activities, supracurricular being anything extra you've done academically. So this can include any online learning you've done through courses on, say, FutureLearn or Open University. If you've been keeping up your own blog, say on Medlink or on other forums, that's another important point to add under supracurricular achievements. You need to show that you have a good social/work-life balance, because as a doctor, it's a very stressful environment, and you need to show that you're able to handle and cope with the stress and pressures. And just to reiterate at the end, you should get your statement reviewed, either by school teachers, family, friends, if you know anyone in a medical profession in your family. I'm sure they'll be happy to review your statement and make any suggestions and help you to perfect your personal statement. That's what I have for the personal statement. Thank you.
Thank you for that section on personal statement, Hassan. I'm now going to pass it over to Maria Iqbal, a third-year medical student from St. George's University of London Medical School, who's going to give an introduction on the interview process and how to prepare for it, as well as clearing and what to do if your application is unsuccessful. So I'll pass it over to Maria, inshallah.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. As Zain said, my name's Maria. I'm a third-year medical student at St. George's. So I'm going to be going through the interview and also what to do if you don't get in. I think that I have quite a unique perspective on this because I ended up missing my grades. So I did biomed and then I transferred internally into medicine. So I've had to go through 2 different applications. So I kind of have learned over the years what works and what doesn't work. So first things first, the interview is a really, really important stage. For a lot of universities, they give out a lot of interviews after reading your personal statement, and then the interview stage is where they're going to make most of their cuts. And this is because at the interview, they get to meet you as a person and see if you are suited to their course, and they get to see all about your characteristics, which is why I feel that the interview is a chance for you to show off your skills, and it is a chance to show yourself off. And it's really important to be confident and to smile and to be enthusiastic and show them that you deserve a place. And further on from that, it's really important to be able to back up what you're saying as well, which I'll go through a little bit later. For the interviewer, it's much easier to engage with a student who loves what they're saying and who's really interested in what they're saying. And you'll end up doing a lot better in your interview, and you'll actually enjoy the process as well. Even if you feel nervous, it's really important to just fake it and smile, because again, that's something that interviewers will look for. So the first thing that I think is really, really important is to practice. You don't need to practice months in advance. Typically, you'll get your interview date, and it's good to start practicing maybe a few weeks before that, depending on when your applications are sent off to universities. If you start too early, there is a chance that you just burn out, and then it becomes quite a long process and you end up re-rehearsing your answers too much. And the key thing is, for interviewers, you can tell when a student has rehearsed their answers. I didn't realize this, but when I helped students last year and I was a mock examiner, I could tell when students had clearly been practicing their answers a lot, because although the content's really good, you kind of lose interest because they sound like they're just reading lines. So it's really important, if you have family or friends who are doctors, practice with them, because they'll be able to give you good feedback on the content of your answer. If you don't have family or friends who are doctors or in the healthcare field, that's completely fine as well. There are plenty of interview books out there. One of them is by ISC Medical, and I can send a picture to Zain and he can send it on to all of you. It's a very common medical interview book that people use, and you can then give it to any family or friend and they can just ask you questions and you can answer, and there's a mark scheme for each question. So even if they're not in a healthcare field, they can still provide you with feedback. And one thing that's really important when you're practicing is to record yourself answering. For a lot of medical schools, because of COVID, there might be a shift now because we're kind of coming out of the pandemic, but medical school interviews could still be online. My one, when I was the second time round, when I was transferring internally, was online. So recording myself speaking was really useful. And even if it's in person, it will be useful as well, because you can watch yourself back and critique yourself. And if you find this uncomfortable, you can get someone else to watch it and then they can give you feedback as well. But it's really helpful because it picks up on things that you might not even notice that you're doing, saying a word too much or looking too much at the floor, not using your hands. Small things like that that make a difference to the quality of your answer. And then it's also really important to speak slowly. So adrenaline will always make you speak faster, and you have to speak slowly, kind of more than you think is normal, in order to actually sound normal in the moment. Everything seems sped up when you're nervous. And it's always important to take a few seconds before you answer the question. Even if you know what you're saying and you know that you have a great answer ready, just take a few seconds so the interviewer knows that your answers are not rehearsed. And again, it will just make you sound cleaner. I just wanted to cover types of questions that you may encounter. I have a PowerPoint slide on this that I'm happy to send out later, but for the sake of time, there are lots of different questions that you can get. The slides that I have are specific to my university. So when you get your interviews, it's really important to try and ask around. If you know anyone at those universities, ask them what kind of questions may come up, because it depends on the university. Some may focus more on research, some may focus more on work experience, there may be a blend. And also, I think Hassan mentioned this earlier, but you can get panel interviews or MMI interviews. So panel interviews will be a continuous process. You have 3 people sitting in front of you, and it's much more conversational than an MMI, where you are sitting for 5 minutes with one person who's asking you a specific question, and then you move on to a different station and you never see that person again. So for panel interviews, I would definitely work on being able to deliver answers, but continuously. So when you are practicing, definitely incorporate that and practice people asking you questions in a 20-minute or 30-minute time frame continuously. And for MMIs, it's a bit more flexible. You can ask different questions in different time frames because you won't just be sitting in front of one person the whole time. So there are pros and cons to both types, but it's really important to tailor your interview approach to both. And again, it's really, really important to remember that in your personal statement, you obviously cannot include all of your experiences, and you may have lots to reflect on, lots of experiences that you've had, but your interview is the time for you to share all of those and to be able to show them the skills that you've gained and why it's important as a doctor. And that leads me on to one of my last points about structuring your answers. One of the most important stations, I think, is your work experience station, because it shows that you've kind of been proactive in taking time to learn about being a doctor and being in that environment. And it shows that, well, you'll be able to show the interviewer that you're really keen and you're excited to kind of start your journey in medicine. The way that I would structure an answer about this is to pick out key skills that you've learned. When I was prepping for my interviews, I made a table of skills. So, you know, I had leadership on there, I had teamwork on there, I had empathy on there. And then in the box next to it, I put how I'd developed that skill, you know, whether it's through sports, whether it's through societies, you know, in sixth form, in school, at university. And then the second, or the third box would be where I saw it on work experience. So did I see a doctor being really empathetic to a nervous patient before their surgery, and something like that. And then you talk about why is this really important in medicine. So I'll just recap that. So it's how you've developed the skill, where you saw it on work experience, and why is it important to have as a doctor. That's, for me, there are lots of different ways to structure it out there if you look them up online, but for me this was the best way to do it, because then in my head I was able to structure my answer and actually deliver a clean answer to the interviewers, and they were able to understand me. You may think that you're delivering a good answer and you're using all sorts of keywords and you're reflecting, but if your structure isn't good, the interviewer won't be able to follow you, and then that won't work in your favor. That's everything I have for the interview section. I'm just going to move on to clearing. So clearing can be a very daunting process, because obviously at this time, clearing is the section that you go into when you have missed your grades or you didn't actually end up getting any offers. So it's post results day, you know, you have your results, and then you're able to call up universities who may have spaces free. Typically, you will know in advance which universities have spaces for your course that you want to do. So a lot of universities will post on their social media sites and also their websites about which courses they have spaces for. So I know for my uni at St. George's, they'll always be like, we have spaces for medicine, we have spaces for biomed, and then they'll have the numbers alongside the course, so you know which numbers to call. My advice is, way in advance, as soon as they post it on their social media, write down the course, the university, and the number, so that on the day, whenever clearing opens, you don't have to stress. For students in the UK who have got their A-level results, that day is a very stressful day. And if you're going through clearing, it's then another thing to have to look up all the numbers, find out which courses have spaces. It's much easier to just have your list with you and then go through it methodically, and that's very helpful. It's also, that helps because calling them earlier rather than later means you're more likely to get a space, because a lot of times there's a lot of students calling in one go, and so spaces fill up really, really quickly. It's also really important to be clever about your options, which is something I'm going to touch on in the next section, where I'm going to go through what to do if you're unsuccessful. And what I mean by being clever about your options is there are some universities like mine where there is a chance for you to transfer internally into medicine. But as I said, I'm going to touch on that a bit later. And then grades. So obviously this is a really big thing. You have to think about your grades and think about which universities will accept that on clearing day. So some universities have a very high offer grade and have a very high grade threshold in general. I would advise being being optimistic but not overly hopeful, and waste your time calling universities who definitely won't accept you with the grades that you have. So again, it's just important to be clever about it. And remember, it's definitely not the end of the world, because inshallah you will get to where you need to go to. And if you want to do medicine, there are loads of paths, which leads me nicely onto my next option. So if you're unsuccessful, what do you do? So as I said before, you have to look at your grades. If you got your grades, but you just didn't manage to get an offer that year, or an interview, and on clearing day, every university you call says your grades are great and your personal statement is great and your UCAT score is great, but we just don't have any room for you, that's fine. Because the first option that I want to talk about is taking a gap year. Lots of students take a gap year voluntarily or because they didn't get in. And in that year, you can do lots of things to make your year productive. So lots of students get a job in a healthcare setting. So becoming a healthcare assistant is quite a common job to get. You could just work in the hospital in admin, you could work in a GP surgery, you could be a porter, anything like that, that gives you that exposure to healthcare during your year off. You could volunteer for any healthcare services, and then just, again, getting work experience and being up to date with everything and being up to date with medical news. It's really important to make the most of your year off if you do take a gap year, because most likely you'll write about that in your personal statement if you apply again, and you will be asked in an interview what you did in your gap year. So it's really, really important to just make the most of it. And again, you don't just have to take part in medical activities. It will be really nice in helping to make you a more well-rounded person, which you can then talk about in your interviews. Because although interviewers look at the medical side of things, what have you done for yourself to kind of show them that you're interested in medicine, it's really important to look at the non-medical stuff. So again, what skills can you pick up that will help you in becoming a doctor from non-medical activities? Universities want to see that you're a well-rounded person. They don't just want to see that you're interested in medicine 24/7. So that's my first one, taking a gap year. And the second one is resitting. I don't know if the rules have changed, so it's really important to look it up. And also some universities have different rules as well. But check if universities accept A-level resits. If you missed one grade, so that one subject, and you want to take a year out and redo it, and take your chances and then reapply, then that may work in your favor as well. This is just one option, but again, it depends on the unis. I know some universities do not accept resits, which is why I'm saying that's something that you need to look into if it comes to that. So the third option, I think, is probably the most common one. You all will have probably know someone who's done this option. Yeah, as I said, it's really common. So the first one, this one is doing a different degree and then going into medicine afterwards. So typically people do biomed. I did biomed. It's quite common, and you'll find if you do biomed, 90% of people on your course want to do medicine. So you're kind of all in the same boat there. Other options are biology, biochemistry. You could do something completely different, but typically people who want to do medicine afterwards will pick a course that's a bit similar. So now I get onto the point about transferring internally. Some universities have schemes where you can actually transfer. The Medic portal is a really good website because it goes through all the universities that actually offer this, how tricky it is to get in, kind of what the requirements are, and just lots of information about it. So I would definitely recommend that everyone checks it out. These schemes are usually highly competitive. However, it is definitely a route to consider. If you didn't get into medicine and you are then doing a different course, it might be good to just pick a course where there is an option for you to transfer, because you never know. If you work hard, I mean, anything is achievable. So it's definitely something to consider. And as I said, the Medic portal is really good because it explains the different requirements and which unis. Not every university will offer like a transfer scheme, but there are some in London and some outside of London. So you can be flexible with your choices. And that's also something to consider when you are applying on your UCAS as well for your backup offer. That's why a lot of people pick St. George's not to brag about me, but a lot of people pick St. George's because they have a transfer scheme. So in everyone's mind, it's like, okay, if I don't get into medicine, I can do biomed at St. George's and then try and transfer internally. And if I can't, then I'll just apply afterwards. So this leads me on to my next point, which is graduate medicine. So imagine you finished your degree, typically it's a 3-year degree. In your 3rd year, so your final year of your degree, you can then reapply for medicine, and you can apply through UCAS. There are different pros and cons to this. The pro is that you have the experience of having another degree behind you. That's really, really useful, and you can do so much in university to help boost your application. I've seen all of my friends go through that process, and you really do have an advantage in a lot of ways compared to other students who are, in year 13, because there are a lot of opportunities for you at university. And also when you're applying, you can apply for undergrad and graduate programs as well. It's not limited, so you can apply to both. However, it's just dependent on your preferences. How long would you rather do an undergraduate course, which is 5 years, or 6 if you do a BSc, or a graduate course, because graduate medicine courses are 4 years. So you're spending less time at university overall. And also another pro is that your A-level grades don't matter here. When you apply through to graduate medicine in university, you have to ask the university for a predicted grade for you. What do they think you're going to get first, or a 2-1 or a 2-2, and they will base this on your grades in the first 2 years of university. So it's really, really important, if you do have that goal of medicine in mind in your first degree, you need to be able to work hard, because that will affect your predicted grade, and then therefore that will affect your application when you apply for medicine the second time round. It's really good to try and aim for a first, because that way universities will look at your application a bit more, they'll notice it more. But yeah, first or 2-1, you should be in kind of good hands to apply for medicine again. And then just a few kind of points to think about. I'm not going to call them cons, because I think that applying for graduate medicine is a very viable option. It does require hard work, but so does everything. And if you're determined, you can definitely do it. But some things to think about are that you have to redo your UCAT or your BMAT or the GAMSAT. The GAMSAT is it's more of a rare exam, I'd say. I think they use it in Australia, but some universities like St. George's use it if you're applying for graduate medicine. I'm not sure if other universities do use it, but regardless, you have to do another entrance exam. And also you have to write a new personal statement. You can't use your old one. And when you apply through UCAS again, you need to write a completely new one. But I think that is very doable, because if you think about it, while you're in university, you're going to have a lot more experiences and reflections and new work experience to write about. And that's fine. And also universities do offer a lot of support in terms of UCAS guidance. So don't worry about the fact that you're not in school anymore and you don't have that support, or you're not in sixth form anymore and you don't have that support, because universities are really, really good about providing kind of pathways for you. And also app students will also be really helpful in providing different activities and different kind of events to help you. So don't think that you don't have support out there. It's very, very doable. And then number 5 is physician's associate. I mentioned this because if you don't get into medicine a second time round, it can be very, very disheartening. I've watched people go through it and it is very, very difficult, and you could definitely apply again. There's no harm in that, but then it's also important to consider other options. Physician's associate is more of a newer degree, I'd say. Typically, as part of the healthcare team, being a physician's associate, and a lot of the roles are similar to being a doctor. And there are some differences. I don't think they can prescribe to patients like a doctor can, but they're part of the healthcare team. They're involved in a patient's management, involved in a patient's treatment. It's a very, very respectable degree, and it is similar to the role of a doctor if you were interested in medicine and you didn't get in. It's a 2-year course or a 3-year course if you do it part-time. Some universities offer a part-time degree, and it is difficult. But as I keep repeating, you know, I don't want anyone to feel disheartened. I want people to feel motivated, because I do think that if you are inspired and you are determined, then inshallah, you know, like, you can do anything you want. But yeah, physician's associate is definitely something to consider. I think the last thing before I finish is that I just want to say that you can come back to medicine at any time in your life. There's no rule that says that you have to, you know, leave sixth form and then do medicine, or you do medicine at 21. You know, I have people on my course who are in their 30s and 40s, and they decided that they wanted to do medicine, and then they applied. You know, they have kids, they're married, they've had, you know, 15 years at a job in finance, but they've decided they have a huge passion for medicine. So don't let anything put you off or hold you back. That's everything I had to say, so I'll pass back to Zain.
Thank you, Maria, for that brilliant overview of the clearing process, as well as the interview process. And just to remind all attendees, if you do have any further queries that we don't get a chance to answer today, please do reach out via our email or our social media pages, put in the chat, and they'll also be reminded again at the end. For now, I'm going to pass over to Dr. Faraz Mir, who's going to give a brief overview about the admissions process. Just a background for Dr. Faraz Mir: he's a consultant physician, as well as being the chair for the Central Council for the British National Formulary, known as the BNF, and a current admissions tutor at Cambridge. So he has a wealth of experience, and inshallah he'll be able to provide an insight into the admissions process for medical school.
Thanks, Zain. Can you hear me? Excellent. I think my microphone wasn't very good before. So, well, in actual fact, I think Maria and Aisha have done a fantastic job, and most of what I wanted to say has probably been said already. So, well done, ladies. Perhaps I could just add in a few words from my perspective. So, my experience is, of course, just with Cambridge. I've been here for the last 17, 18 years now, and I don't know what the other medical schools are like, so I can only talk about my own medical school. So if you want to apply to Cambridge, for instance, Cambridge is a confederation of about 30 odd colleges. So although you apply to the University of Cambridge to do medicine, you have to apply to one of the individual colleges. And I suppose the things to look out for in terms of shortlisting people are obviously you've got to get good GCSEs, and you have to have good A levels predicted at sort of 2 A stars and A at the very minimum. When people apply, I think people have already talked about the personal statement. I think that is very important. I think work experience is important. But I think the most important thing is if you write anything in your personal statement, it is fair game for you to be asked about it in your interview. So if you go on about, you know, I love my attachment to the care home and I learned so much about dementia, and then I ask you about dementia at the interview and you know nothing about it, I think that, to my mind, actually is quite a negative point. So anything you put on your personal statement, anything you put on your form is absolutely fair game for interview. In terms of selection or shortlisting, I think GCSEs, A levels are important. Your personal statement and work experience are good too. We talked about BMAT. So if you have a good BMAT, so we're looking at sort of 6 and above in section 1 and 2, ideally, and about 3 or above in section 3, then you're almost guaranteed an interview. And I think that's half the battle. So, you know, you need to be selected for the interview, and then I can say a bit about the interview in a minute. But the most important thing to say is universities like Cambridge are very keen to broaden their appeal to candidates from ethnic backgrounds, from ethnic minority backgrounds, if you like, if I can say that, and also people of different gender, people of different religion, etc., etc. So we are very keen to try and attract a diverse studentship. And if, for instance, you come from a deprived area, because we actually have all this data. So when you apply, if you're applying from a deprived area of the country, then actually that will count in your favour, because we are keen to have more representation from those parts of the country. If, for instance, you're from a private school, you might get a slightly tougher rider into, because we know a lot of private school people have extra tuition, extra coaching for them to do well at interviews. Whereas if you come from a inner city comprehensive, then actually we may be a bit more generous with the way we interview you and be sort of prepared for that. But we are very, very keen, because there's a bad, Cambridge and other universities like Cambridge have a bad reputation for being quite elitist and being quite selective. And I think we are very keen to try and reverse that perception. So that's the background. I mean, if you've done well in BMAT, you've done well at GCSEs, and you've got good A-levels predicted, you almost certainly will be invited for an interview. So we don't give any places without interview like most medical schools. The interview at Cambridge will vary between different colleges, but I mean, in my college, where I'm the admissions tutor for medicine, is King's, and what we will do is have 2 interviews, each about 25 to 30 minutes, and there'll be at least 2 people at each interview. And the interviews are quite academic in the sense that, yes, we might ask you about your form. So the first question will almost invariably be, oh, I see you've put in your personal statement that you have an interest in, I don't know, helping out at the local mosque. And then you might have a discussion about how that might lead to you being a better doctor, for instance, in terms of your people skills, in terms of your communication skills, etc., etc. So that's to put you at ease. Very rarely do we ask about, oh, why do you want to do medicine, or why Cambridge? Because people have already prepared a very, very well polished answer, and it actually tells me very little. So the question will often be about your personal statement, and then we may ask you academic questions. So there won't be questions about your GCSEs or A-levels or anything like that. There'll often be some questions which are different and may not actually have a right or wrong answer. So there may be some data that I give you. I might give you a graph. I might give you a table of figures. I might give you some scenarios and ask you to talk me through them. And we'll ask you lots of questions relating to those scenarios. And again, often there's no right or wrong answer. It's really the way how you work through that question and that answer, and whether you can think laterally or whether you are just completely blinkered by your bookwork and you find it difficult to come out of your comfort zone. So it's basically a way of putting you in a bit of stress, dare I say, in an interview environment and seeing how you respond. The medical course at Cambridge is very academic, so it's very scientific, science heavy. It's probably the most science heavy course in the whole country, and therefore, very rightly, the interview is quite academic to reflect that. So often people will come for the interview, they'll come out of the interview and think, oh my God, that was horrendous, and they feel very almost downbeat about it and think, oh gosh, I think I did really badly. But actually, like I say, I'm not looking at the right or wrong answer. What we're looking at is how you think when put under a bit of stress, and whether you can think a bit more laterally and not think just about your A-levels and GCSEs that you've done. And I think, if I'm perfectly honest, that's where students from Pakistani heritages, from Pakistani backgrounds, fall down. They are very good on paper. They have good GCSEs. They've got very good A-levels predicted. They've got very good CVs. They do all the work experience. They do all the other stuff. But when you put them in an interview situation, they often they are very nervous because they're very perhaps under pressure from family or friends or peers about the fact they're coming to Cambridge. But also they like to, every time you ask them a question, they will want to go back into an area that they're comfortable with. So they'll almost naturally gravitate towards the A-level knowledge or the GCSE knowledge, and they don't like to explore or try and be brave in an interview and perhaps think a bit more out of the box. And I think that's, if I can say anything that might help you in the interview for Cambridge or Oxford, then it would be that, is to not be too focused and obsessed about what you know or don't know, but actually just think further afield about how the world is, how the current affairs are, how science works in this country, and how you might get the best out of a scientific course. So that's, I think, really all I would say about Cambridge. I mean, it is a very different course to most universities. Our first 3 years are very, very preclinical, i.e. they're predominantly science. There is little clinical contact or clinical experience in those years. There is some, but not very much. So you do basically a 3 years undergraduate degree, and then you do a 3 years clinical course. So, I mean, some people may not like that. They may want to have a much more vertically integrated course. So if that's the case, I wouldn't apply to Cambridge. You will find it quite challenging in that respect. Otherwise, I think I've been answering some of the questions in the chat box the best I can. And I certainly am not trying to put international students off coming to the UK, but if you do not have good funding sources, it is very, very expensive. That is the truth of the matter. And I'm afraid there is no easy way around that. You can apply for one of the Turing Fellowships, which are very, very competitive. But if you are academically able, then that's certainly an option for you. More than happy to take questions, then. Back to you.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Mir, for that insight, especially into the Cambridge interviews, which I'm sure many are interested in application for. Before we end, we're going to move over to the section specific for dentistry. Just as a reminder on the Q&As, we've answered, as Dr. Mir mentioned, as we've gone through as many as we can. We're going to keep doing so as we can and hopefully get through a lot of your questions. If there are any left over, please do reach out to us. And as for questions about help going forward, if you stay in touch via our social media pages on both Apps UK and on Apps Students, there'll be lots of information about the courses coming up and providing help for admissions into medical and dental school, inshallah. I'll now pass on to Aiza Imran, who, like Hassan, also has experience with Apps UK programs in getting into medical school, in this case, dental school. So I'll pass it over to her for further insights, inshallah.
Thank you. I'm Aiza, and I'm a second year dental student at Barts in the London. And so I just want to say that most of the dental stuff is pretty similar to the medical stuff for the application process. The main difference is the interview, where I'd say, sorry, can you hear me? Okay. So for the dental interviews, for the MMI stations especially, you'll get asked hot topics in the dental field, which most of them will include stuff about amalgam, because that's a very big issue in the dental field, and also fluoridation in water. So I think those are two things that you'd need to be very prepared on. Also, you need to understand ethics in dentistry. So for example, you'll get different scenarios and how to solve them. So for example, it could be like, if you had like a student who was maybe sharing work or pictures of patients' teeth without having consent from the patient, how would you go about this and solve this problem? Another thing that you'd need to know is the General Dental Council standards and guidelines. So there's 9 of them, and you need to familiarize yourself with them and be able to describe them, because that's another scenario that you could get at your MMI interview stations. And of course, some basic dental conditions you need to know, such as plaque, calculus, and what they are. And also at some MMI interviews, such as Bristol University, I think they have a manual dexterity station. So they might ask you to do like a little fiddly task, but some interviews don't. But you can also bring along like an example of your artwork or something you've knitted perhaps, or anything like that, just to show your manual dexterity, because again, that's like a big thing. Also, there's not much, like when you search up online, there's not much help for dental interviews. So there is a book called The Multiple Mini Interviews for UK Dental School on Amazon, and it has over 300 questions, which can really help. And that's one of the main things I use to prepare for my interview. Also, you'll need to describe your teamwork skills, because as a dentist, you'll be working as a team all the time. And it's good to have a scenario that relates back to you and how you worked as a team. And also your knowledge of the dental school and why you want to study there. Because a lot of the interviews I had, they would ask me why I specifically wanted to come to this dental school and maybe not enough different ones. So the main reasons would be the teaching style, because some use PBL, which is problem-based learning, where you learn in a team, whereas some prefer to just do lectures and seminars. So you're more working by yourself. And for the work experience, you'll normally get a station on that as well. And most dental schools do require 2 weeks minimum of work experience. So here you would just describe any good, interesting cases you've seen, and any like maybe problematic patients, or one that's inspired you to take up this career. And yeah, I'd say for further help on this, for the interview section of dentistry, to use the mini multiple interviews for UK Dental School book. Thank you.
Thank you for that overview of the dental interview process, Aiza. We've now concluded the main portion of talks, and Aiza's just put on the screen a link to a feedback form, as well as the social media pages. This is just a reminder, please do scan this form and fill in the feedback form, as it does help for all of us who have put our time towards delivering this talk to you today. So please do fill that in and make comments with specific points that you found useful today, inshallah. Beneath that is also the link to the social media pages. A lot of you have asked, how do we keep updated with what's going on regarding future programs to help us into medical and dental school? By keeping in touch via the social media pages and using the links there in the bio and keeping in touch and reaching out to us through there, we can keep you updated with anything that might be going on. So just a reminder, please scan this for the feedback. Regarding certain questions, most of them have now been answered. If there are a few that we didn't get a chance to answer for the sake of time, I'm sorry about that, and please do reach out via our social media pages or via our email, which again was put in the chat earlier, and we will get back to you, endeavor to get back to you as soon as possible. I'd now like to pass it over to Dr. Hafiz from APS UK, who'd like to make a few comments before closing remarks on the application for international students and private students, addressing some of the questions that were put in the chat function.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentations, very powerful, lot of information to take, but we're going to continue this process. I'm going to just share a few tips of what we have learned in this process over last few years. We have a lot of success stories. Obviously, our main focus is to hold the hand of people who do not have any medic in their family. And we have many people. I can talk about some refugees who came to UK only 2-3 years ago. Even last year, we had a refugee from Iran who was on our course. So obviously, all of those students got into medicine, obviously through the support which APS UK has been providing. We will run APPS UK virtual work experience. We have been running it for last 2 years. This will be our 3rd year. So keep an eye. We will be opening those registrations around June time, when most students obviously look for the placements. We are going to provide you support or run some sessions like these in terms of specifically how to write a statement. And then later on in around September, October time, we will run an interview preparation course. Our interview preparation course run over 8 weeks, 10 weeks. We do not believe any course where you just go for half a day, sit and listen to the talks will train you for a good interview. We run a weekly course where you come to us every week for 1 hour. We practice those questions. We give you feedback specific to you in terms of how you can improve. But to be able to enjoy all these services, you must be an APS UK member. So if a doctor is APS UK active member, paid member, their children access all our services for free. And APS UK is a charitable organization. Money doesn't go in anybody's pocket. All money is used for our good causes. So I would encourage all of you to please go on our website, fill the form, become our active member. That way you will have all these privileges available to you. Some important points regarding choosing a university. I think I've seen many students who are very clever. When they make a selection of the universities, as you know, there are only 4 options. And students go for the top ranking universities. Please do think carefully. I've seen people, they choose the top universities, don't get in, and the student was pretty good. And if they have kept 4th option as one of the low grade universities, they would have definitely got in. So this is very important point. And on that note, there are some universities, I'll give you the example of UCLan, where I think 80% seats are for international students. So obviously you need to see where your probability of getting into a university is much, much higher. And those students who resit, for example, if you have a dropped grade, the universities then expect a higher grade from you. For example, if you were previously given a choice of 3 A's, they will say now you have to do 3 A stars, or whichever subject you are repeating, they will expect a higher grade. Obviously, be careful on this. And then there are some universities who do not accept repeat candidates. And if you choose them, that means you have missed on your option. Okay? straight away you're not shortlisted. And I've seen many examples where students do not actually, do proper research, and then they miss just because of that small point. There is a lot to talk. I'm quite excited. The next batch, last batch, only finished a few weeks ago. So we will be taking things forward. And then I'm going to pass over to our president, Dr. Ghulam Abbas, to say a few concluding remarks before we finish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdul Hafiz, MBE, and our founder, the brain behind this program. Thank you very much for putting together such a wonderful program. And also, I will thank all the presenters and the APS UK student wing and APS UK team who has put together this wonderful program to support prospective medical students. So APS UK has history of supporting not only prospective medical students, but also medical students as well as doctors working in the UK. I will say that being a doctor myself and orthopedic spinal consultant in Bedfordshire, medicine is absolutely fantastic career. If you speak to one of the great achievers in the world, they will always moan about their profession. If you say, bring all the presidents and prime ministers from the world, they will always moan about things. Doctors are no exception. But once you have done medicine, there's always job for you. You can choose which country you want to settle in. This is recession-proof. This is pandemic-proof profession. So there's a lot of opportunities for you once you qualify as a doctor. And I will encourage you to go and learn those principles and write down. I myself have 2 medical students in the family who are doing medicine, and a lot of our colleagues. This reflects that medicine is something which we choose and our children are choosing. So something which we are really attracted. It is a service to humanity as well as it gives you good life. And I wish you best of luck for your future. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much again, once again, to all attendees and all panelists, all speakers for the day. I hope all attendees did find it beneficial, and just a reminder to please fill in the feedback form which is in the chat, and if you have any further questions, to reach out to us via social media pages or via email addresses, and to keep in up to date with any further programs that may be on the way, inshallah. Thank you once again for joining.